Anti-fascist protesters disrupt a Maxime Bernier event. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. It seems that with each passing day we're reaching new levels of polarization in Canada. Today's story is about Maxime Bernier. He's the leader of the People's Party of Canada, and he was on the receiving end of an anti-fascist rally in Guelph, Ontario. This is likely the most insane reaction from a group of fools I have seen in quite some time, and I'm going to point out the hypocrisy of these ralliers in just a second. But first, here's some background on Bernier in case you are unaware of him. He was previously a member of the Conservative Party. In 2017, the leadership elections came down to two people, him, Bernier, and versus his opponent, Scheer. Bernier went on to lose the race, and Scheer became the leader of the Conservative Party. I'm sure you've heard of him, but Bernier was not a complete scrub. He had some pretty large support. In the 13th round of votes, he amassed 49% of people's support, which doesn't make him just any random politician. He had some pull. Bernier has had some issues of his own. He's come under fire for his stance on things like culture and immigration, but in his defense, at least he has vocal opinions and a vision for his leadership. I'm sure there are a lot of policies of his that I could argue against, and at the same time, some I could argue for, pretty much like every other politician. I find that interesting though, because I cannot say the same for Andrew Scheer, the person who beat him in the leadership race. We still know very little about Scheer and his platform. I also don't see Scheer as being a strong leader in terms of personal character. Now I could be wrong, but he has not done much to provide evidence to the contrary. The reason why I'm saying all of this is because I believe the landscape of the elections would be very different if Bernier had won the Conservative leadership. Scheer has let the polls drop as of late, and that's pretty baffling to me. Trudeau has made up ground, and Scheer is still sitting idly by, not doing too much of anything. This is not to say that Bernier is the ideal candidate either, but let's face the facts. Right now, none of the current leaders seem that appealing, regardless of party. Bernier held similar sentiments, and because of that, because he was not satisfied with the leadership of the parties, he ended up creating his own after having disagreements with Andrew Scheer about numerous things. So, regardless of whether you agree with Bernier's policies or not, having more political diversity is a good thing, and this upcoming election is just proof of that. I don't want to be pigeonholed into picking between Scheer or Trudeau. This brings into question the electoral system itself and whether or not something like proportional representation would be better, but now I'm digressing. This is where things get important though, in relation to the story today, the anti-fascism rally. They've taken offense to Bernier and his party. They have identified him as a threat and a villain. The People's Party of Canada is really best defined as a populist party, a right-wing populist party, and Bernier even calls it that himself. He stated that the party is a coalition of people who are disenchanted with traditional politicians who say one thing one day and the other on the next day. That's typical populist messaging right there. So keep in mind though, populism is not inherently bad. It's dependent on the leader and how they want to use it. It's not even a political ideology per se, it's more so a vehicle that can take on numerous different forms and bring you to numerous different places. Bernier wants his party to be based on freedom, responsibility, fairness, and a respect that speaks for all Canadians and does not look to appease special interest groups. Now, the party has never been in power, so we don't know if he would actually hold true to those ideals, but that's their mandate. They also incorporate some libertarian views which advocate for less government involvement in the everyday lives of people. Personally, I don't agree with libertarianism in a broad sense, as I believe shrinking government is not the solution to everything and is actually counterproductive in many senses, but those are his pillars in a nutshell. Keep in mind though, that libertarianism is literally the opposite of totalitarianism, and I'm going to get to that in a second. So you fast forward to now. The Guelph Post reports that Bernier had a PPC event, the People's Party of Canada, cancelled due to safety concerns over a planned anti-fascist rally. So who organized this rally? The Revolutionary Communist Party of Guelph. I just have to shake my head at that. When I first saw this, I had to double take. Are they really trying to revive a communist versus fascism dichotomy? And they're actively trying to express communism as the good side of things? Is this the 1900s Europe? Stalin would truly be proud of these guys. Before I even go further, I have to clear this idiocy up. Bernier's party is hardly fascist. As I said before, one of their pillars is libertarianism. They want less government involvement. What you need to be a fascist is authoritarianism, which is a prerequisite for fascism and communism. Fascism is characterized by extreme nationalism though, which you can argue that Bernier might be pushing, but even that's a stretch, as world conquest is not a part of his plans, and that's really the only leg they can kind of stand on, even that's super wobbly. So it's a false label that the group has administered. They are in fact communists though. It's literally in the name of their organization. I am no fan of either form of authoritarian regime. They are both immensely evil. I don't like fascism, and I don't like communism. The difference is, I'm not sure that Bernier is even fascist, while it's clear that the ralliers are communist. I'm honestly shocked that people can legitimately desire communism. It makes zero sense. It demonstrates a tremendous lack of understanding in terms of both policy and history. Not even 100 years ago, we had the likes of Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao walking the earth, all trying to bring about those policies and communism. We can all see very clearly how that turned out. Mass institutionalization of the populace, for number one, dictator leaders, for number two, and of course you get equality for the third one, but be careful what you wish for. It's now where everyone's equally rich. It's quite the opposite. Everyone became equally poor, so there's equality for you. And that's not even to mention the evils of the regime that stem from these supposed ideals of justice. Then on the flip side, you even have these psychological detriments to things like communism. And I will go as far as saying it's not compatible with humans. It just doesn't make sense, and it's never going to succeed. It's a terrible system, and we've tried it. We've seen the aftermath. How much time and effort is it going to take for that to sink in to people's heads? It's funny enough that the 1900s, people only really know about Nazism and fascism. Communism was just as alive and well, just as thriving, and almost as evil. They had their gulags too. They were killing a bunch of people. It's not something to be openly trying to advocate for, and I believe it should be seen in the same light as fascism. If you hear someone say they're a fascist, it's immediately condemned. But then you have some dumbasses say they're in favor of communism, and all of a sudden it's all good. It's a complete lack of understanding, and it's really shameful. So you can already see these vices of communism manifesting in the ralliers themselves. They're using threats of violence to shut down opposing viewpoints. They were amped up and presented the threat of havoc, so Bernier couldn't even show up to talk about his platform. Is that how we want political disagreements to be handled? This brings me to one of the issues with Bernier's own party though. Populism can result in this. Communism, when you boil it down, it itself is really a populist message to the working people. At least that was how it was first intended and conceived. It inspired a feeling that the working class were betrayed by the elites and they needed violent revolution. Bernier is playing the same game, but not as extreme, and that's why I stress that populism is not inherently bad, but the leader of the movement needs to be extremely virtuous, or it has a risk to devolve into chaos. In a sense, it releases and channels pent-up aggressions. If you do that productively, it can be good, but without care, it will be chaos. You can see that ironically within the protesters. It's shameful that this is where things have fallen to in regards to this talking about your platform. If the ralliers have issues with it, they have some type of problem with what Bernier is saying, well, that's why we have debate and intellectual discussion. All they've done, funnily enough, is give Maxime even more publicity, and they still fail to address their grievances productively. This is the same bullshit happening in America with Antifa. It's really a group of idiots who are banding together in the supposed name of justice while wreaking havoc. And they all feel good about it because, yeah, we're so virtuous, we're doing the right thing, but in reality, they're just fools. The difference is that in Canada, people are not as quick to condone these behaviors. That leads me to believe that over in America, they are far more polarized, but they represent where things can fall. I'll give you an example. The Antifa group I mentioned before, they don't really get that much media attention, but they're pretty much doing the same thing as these group of ralliers. They're shutting down conversation, using threats of violence, and they're fighting supposed fascism in the streets. The American left-leaning Democrats, they don't really condemn them. They're saying it's all good, even though they're avidly calling for things like communism. If you had the right side of the party, imagine an anti-communism party that was led by fascists. That would not be a thing, and it's so contradictory because they're equally as bad. Talking about equally destructive ideologies, that's where you can see the polarization in full effect. But in Canada, luckily, I've seen people talk about this. I've seen the comments online on social media. It is definitely not nearly as one-sided. People are still calling out these ralliers and labeling them as the fools that they really are. Honestly, these individuals, they should really be banned from rallies like this. They infringe on the constitutional rights via the threat of violence. If they want to protest, that's fine, but they're not doing it peacefully. That's your right, a peaceful protest. When you start threatening people with violence and the other party can't even come out and speak, that's where you're crossing a serious line. My conclusion is that we really need more education and discussion on politics. These protesters don't even know what they're talking about. They've either been misled or they're willfully blind. I don't see how the PPC is even closely resembling fascism, yet they've adopted this idea and they're ready to administer violence in the name of vanquishing it. The way to save people like that and to get them to think correctly, to make them abandon these foolish notions, is through, as I mentioned, education and discussion. And even from their perspective, let's say that they were right. They're not really doing anything by threatening violence. All that does is harden beliefs. If they really want to see a change, they will need to engage in education or discussion, not physically shutting down people's party events because they think that that's supposedly the right thing to do. Newsflash, it's not. And we don't need less discussion. But, as I said ironically, that's what the activists like these ralliers are really doing. They're shutting down discussion and educational opportunities. It's really a detriment to society, and I don't even know how they can think it's productive and the right thing to do. My honest hope is that these are just a bunch of kids who are uneducated and they don't really know what they're doing. That's the best case scenario. Worst case is they're just out here causing havoc because they enjoy causing havoc. That would be terrible. So hopefully the PPC can get their chance to have their platform and say their ideas in a more peaceful location and time, because they do have some interesting ideas, and shutting them down entirely like that with no debate, it's really shameful and should not be a part of the political process. So that's about it for today. Thanks for joining me on the Perri platform. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and follow me on Twitter at Perri Platform. I'll see you soon.